I'm going to tell you a story, guys, about a little animal. Now, a long, long time ago, there was a little soft-furred animal that lived in the grass plains of outback Australia. And he was a bandicoot. His mum called him Snoot because he had a really long, pointed, cute snout, really long nose. Now, bandicoots have got big ears, and their ears stand straight up. But Snoot was different because he had one ear that hung down like a rabbit's ear. It was sort of like floppy. Now, his floppy ear didn't give him any trouble with his hearing. He could hear fine, but it gave him a lot of problems at school. Because when he went to the bandicoot school, the kids would bully him and they'd make fun of his floppy ear. At lunchtime, little Snoot used to try and hide from the bandicoot bullies. And he'd try and hide in the bushes, but the schoolyard only had a couple of bushes, so the bullies would always find him. And they'd stand around him and they'd call him nasty names. Every day when Snoot walked home from school, he felt very, very sad. He'd say things to himself like, "I'm different, I'm no good, and I hate my floppy ear." Way out past the grasslands was a mountain, and from the side of that mountain gushed a spring, and the spring flowed down into a river, and that river snaked its way across the grasslands past the old school, and it went down a valley into a dark green rainforest. Now, the bandicoot kids were not allowed to go and play on the banks of the river because bandicoots don't swim very well. And bandicoots would never ever go into the rainforest because they were scared of all the really strange animals that lived there. Now, one day, little Snoot was having a really bad day and he just had to get away. So he squeezed past those kids and he ran down to the river. And when he got down to the riverbank, he said to himself, "I'm going to cross this river and I'm going to go and hide in the rainforest." But when he looked into the river, he could see it was flowing really fast. And he thought, "I can't swim. I can't get across the river and I can't get into the rainforest." But when he looked up the river, he could see that a storm had blown down a big river gum tree and the tree had fallen down across the banks of the river. So he used his sharp little claws and he scurried across the log and he got to the other side of the river. And he said to himself, "Wow, that was fun. Now I can go into the rainforest." But as he started to get closer and closer to the rainforest, he started hearing really strange sounds. Sounds he'd never heard before. He heard a wombat grunt. He heard screeching red-tailed cockatoos. He heard a dingo howling. He didn't know what these sounds were. He heard a swamp frog croaking, and it scared him. But he said to himself, "I don't care. I'm going to go into the rainforest and hide from the bullies." So he crept in really slowly under the canopy into the rainforest. He soon came on to a beautiful billabong, and the billabong was crystal clear and there were lily flowers everywhere, all growing. He saw 2 turtles swim past. Then he saw a platypus. And he said to himself, "I've never seen anything like this before." He then saw an emu. He said, "Wow, what a big bird. And look how big its feet are." He looked down at his own tiny little feet. And then he sat down on a nice, soft, moss green log. He said to himself, "This will be my secret place where I can hide from the bandicoot bullies." But then he looked into the water of the billabong and he saw his reflection He could see his soft, floppy ear hanging down, and it made him really sad. And while he was looking at his ear, he heard a kookaburra laughing. And he thought to himself, even the birds here now are laughing at my ear. And then he thought of the school bullies and the nasty names they called him, like floppy ear, rabbit ear, and silly ear. And then he realised something. I don't have one single friend, he thought. And poor Snoot started to cry, and the tears rolled down his long snoot nose and dripped into the billabong. But then something happened that would change Snoot's life forever. He heard a voice in the branches above, and the voice said, "Why are you crying, Bandicoot?" But when he looked up, he couldn't see any animal. He couldn't see any creature up there. He said, "What are you? Where are you?" Just then, a bird flew down with grey feathers, and it landed right on the log where Snoot was sitting. It had a big wide beak and was all yellow inside, and Snoot was very scared. He thought that bird was going to eat him. And the bird said, "Why are you shivering and shaking? You've got nothing to be worried about with me. I'm a tawny frogmouth bird. And tawny frogmouths, we have feathers that are the same colour and pattern as the branches above, and that's why you couldn't see me. My name is Smartfeather. The animals call me Smartfeather, and I don't eat bandicoots." Now little Snoot, his heart was really pounding. He had his little hands up against his chest. He said, "Oh, when I saw your big beak, I thought you were going to gobble me up. My name is Snoot." But then Snoot thought for a minute, and he said, "Who taught you how to speak Bandicoot, Smartfeather?" And Smartfeather said, "An old wise hoot owl taught me how to speak to all the rainforest animals. I could speak possum, I can speak echidna, I can speak koala, cockatoo, kangaroo, and crocodile too. I can speak the language of every animal." So Snoot said, "Wow, no wonder they call you Smartfeather." Smartfeather said, "You haven't answered my question. Why were you crying before?" So Snoot explained about his floppy ear. He explained that the kids at the Bandicoot school bully me, and they stand around and make fun of my ear and call me nasty names. He then explained that I came into the rainforest, Snoot said, to get away from the bullies. And when I looked into the reflection in the water, I saw my floppy ear. I got really sad. But what made me cry was because I know I don't have any friends. So Smartfeather was very, very angry. He said, "Those Bandicoot kids shouldn't call you names because you're different. They shouldn't call you names because you've got a floppy ear. All the animals in the rainforest are all different. We are all different here. The platypus has a paddle tail. It has a pouch like a kangaroo, but it lays eggs, and it has a beak like a duck. The echidnas that roam around the rainforest have got spines all over their body. The kookaburras, they can't sing one single song. They can only laugh. And look at me, I've got a beak that looks like a puffed up toad. But we don't care that we're different. We're proud, and you should be proud of who you are, Snoot. Anyway, you don't have any friends, but you have one now. I'm going to be your best friend, and I'll teach you how to speak the language of every rainforest animal, and they'll all become your friends." Now, over the next 2 weeks, Snoot learnt how to speak all the languages of the rainforest animals. and they all became his friends. So the next day, he decided that what he would do would be to go back to school, and he would stand up to those bullies, because now he had many, many friends, and he was proud of his floppy ear. He was proud of who he was. So he started walking through the grasslands towards the school. But then something terrible happened. When he looked up at the old schoolhouse, he could see on the horizon there was smoke filling the air. Hot ash and smoke was swirling around up into the sky. What had happened, a lightning storm had been the night before, and it had set fire to the grasslands, and the fire was coming down off the mountain towards the school. So Snoot thought, I've got to save the kids, they'll all be burnt. And he raced up to the school and opened the school door, and all the kids inside, they were all huddled in one corner, and some of them were crying. One of them yelled out, Snoot, there's a big fire coming, we'll be burnt. When the son Smartfeather turned up, he flew in through the door and he landed right on the desk where Snoot was standing. He said to Snoot, there's a fire coming, Snoot. We have to get all these kids out of the school, bring them down to the river. They can cross over the log, and get them all into the rainforest. They'll be safe there because the fire can't cross the river. But Snoot shook his head. They won't follow, Snoot said. They're scared of the river, and they're really frightened of the animals in the rainforest. They won't follow me. But I have a plan. If you can get me back to the rainforest quickly, we'll get all the animals together because I have a plan. So Bravefeather said, well, I'm strong enough, and you're only a little thing. You climb on my back, and we'll fly you to the rainforest really quickly. So little Snoot, he climbed up onto that tawny frogmouse back, and he held on with his little claws, and Smartfeather flew up into the smoke-filled sky. Some of the Bandicoot kids couldn't believe it. Wow, look at that! Snoot can ride on the back of a bird, one of them said. But most of the kids were too scared to worry about that. They could see the fire coming. When Snoot arrived in the rainforest, he gathered up all the animals. He said, I want you to follow me to the banks of the river. There's a terrible fire coming, and I want you to help me save the Bandicoot kids. So after a few minutes, all the animals of the rainforest all came up to the banks of the river, except one, the big old crocodile. Anyway, he said to all the animals, I want you to do something really quickly. I want you to pick up every rock, every stone, and every boulder and stick you can find, and throw it in the river right here. The green frog said, why would we do such a silly thing? So Snoot explained, if we can block the river, if we can dam the river will break its banks and flood into the grasslands and put out the fire, and we'll save the kids. So the animals got to work. The koalas were fantastic because they helped fill up the pouches of the kangaroos with rocks. And the kangaroos would all hop down and empty their pouches into the river. The possums threw sticks in, and the old wombat, they're very powerful animals, really strong legs, and they could push boulders along and roll them down. All the animals helped. And after a short time, there was this huge pile of rocks and sticks and stones in the middle of the river, but it didn't block the river. The river was not dammed. The water kept flowing around the pile of rocks and over the top. When Snoot looked back at the school, he could see the fire now was coming right up to the back of the school, and smoke was everywhere. He could hear the kids coughing in the school. He was really worried because they hadn't blocked the river. But then that big old crocodile turned up. He said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but us big crocodiles move very slowly over land." So Snoot said, "Can you go in the river and use your tail and push all the rocks and sticks and boulders up and make a wall right across the river and dam the river?" So that big croc slid in. In no time, he pushed all the rocks and sticks up and made a wall right across the river. But it didn't dam it. The water flowed through all the holes between the rocks in that wall. One of the possums yelled out, "It's too late, Snoot. The dam's not working. It's too late." And now the fire has completely surrounded the school. So Snoot jumped off the banks of the river. He used all the courage in his little tiny heart, and he walked out onto that wall. And when he looked down, he could see the water was pouring through all the rocks, all through the holes. And he looked back at the rainforest animals and he said, "Is there anyone here that can hold their breath and go underwater and fill up all the little holes in the rocks with mud and clay?" A platypus came up. He said, "I can do it." His whole family joined in, and they started pushing mud and clay in the holes between the rocks, and the river was dammed. It started to break its banks. It flooded across the grasslands and put out the fire. When Snoot looked up at the school, he could see that there was still a lot of smoke swirling around. Now, animals and people can't breathe smoke. We suffocate. So Snoot knew that he had to get up to the school and get those kids out of that school as quickly as he could. But when they got there, they could hear the kids banging on the door on the inside, a big solid timber door. When Snoot tried to open it, he couldn't undo it because the lock on the door had been melted by the heat. So the wallabies tried to push it, they couldn't get through. The wombats put their shoulders to the door and tried to push through, but they couldn't. And then a big old kangaroo came up and he sat back on his tail and he kicked that door open, and the bandicoots all rushed out. The biggest bandicoot of all in that school, who was a bully, came up to Snoot with his head down and he said, "We bullied you, Snoot. We made fun of your floppy ear. We were unkind to you. And you are the brave one. You're the smart one, and you saved all our lives. We are ashamed of who we are and what we've done." Now little Snoot puffed up his chest. He gave the biggest grin his little tiny mouth could give. And all the rainforest animals started to sing and dance around, and the bandicoot kids all joined in, and the kookaburras started laughing. Now a few years later, Snoot became the teacher at that school. And he taught the kids something very, very important, something that I want you guys to remember your whole life. He said to those kids, "You must never, ever bully anybody. You must never make fun of someone because they're different. Because often the kids that are different are the smart ones, and they're the brave ones, and they often make you for the best friends." Now, does anyone have any questions? What's your question?
What do crocodiles eat?
What do crocodiles eat? Well, the little freshwater crocodiles, they mostly eat fish. But the real big saltwater crocodiles, they'll eat almost anything they can catch in the river.
Even humans if they come near.
They can.
Have you ever seen a bandicoot in the wild? And if so, how did you feel when you saw one?
Yeah, I was really, really excited because we were looking for them at night time because they mostly come out of the little burrows at night. And when we saw one, we were very excited. But one thing I was really interested in to see that they were such a small little animal with their little tiny tail and beautiful ears. They're such a cute little fella. They're beautiful things. Now, does anyone have any questions about some of the animals that we talked about in my story today? Okay, tell me your question.
Where do bandicoots live?
They mostly like the really arid country, grasslands, and even right out into the desert country. What's your question?
For tawny frogmouth, how long do they live for?
They can live a really long time. We don't really know, but probably 20 years or a lot more. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed my story today about Snoot the Bandicoot. But if you want to come back and join me another day, I'll tell you another story, because my next story is about an octopus that can ride a skateboard. So I hope to see you guys again. Thank you for being here today.